Have you ever been lying awake at night when someone suddenly appears in your mind? Not someone you spoke to yesterday. Not someone who's still actively part of your life. Someone from years ago. An old friend. A former partner. A person you almost dated. Someone who disappeared without explanation. What's strange is that you weren't trying to think about them. You were thinking about work, or tomorrow's plans, or what to eat for breakfast. And then, somehow, your mind found its way back to them. Again, and again, and again. Meanwhile, a thought quietly follows. What if they never think about me at all? It's a painful question. Not because we expect people to think about us forever, but because it feels unfair. How can someone take up so much space in your mind while you're completely absent from theirs? Why can someone who no longer exists in your present still influence your emotions years later? Most people assume the answer is simple. You still love them. You miss them. You aren't over them. You need closure. But psychology suggests something far more interesting is happening. Because often, the person you're thinking about isn't actually the thing your brain is attached to. Instead, they're connected to something deeper. A feeling. A possibility. A question. A version of yourself. An unfinished story. And understanding that distinction changes everything. Imagine reading a mystery novel. You're completely invested. Every chapter creates more questions. Every page pulls you deeper into the story. Then suddenly, someone tears out the final chapters. The book ends without an ending. No explanation. No resolution. No answers. What happens next? Your mind keeps returning to the story, not because the story is still happening, but because your brain hates unfinished narratives. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon for decades. It's often referred to as the Zeigarnik effect. People tend to remember unfinished experiences more easily than completed ones. Incomplete tasks remain active inside the mind. Interrupted situations linger. Unanswered questions continue generating attention. It's almost as if the brain places a mental bookmark on anything that lacks resolution. Relationships often create some of the largest unfinished stories in human life, especially when they end unexpectedly, especially when there was no clear explanation, especially when there was still hope. The brain keeps searching for the missing chapter, the missing conversation, the missing answer. But here's something important. Many people believe closure comes from another person. One final conversation. One explanation, one apology, one message, one answer. The brain says, if I could just understand what happened, I'd finally move on. But reality rarely works that way, because many people receive explanations and still keep thinking. Many people receive closure and still feel attached. Why? Because closure isn't usually an information problem. It's an emotional problem. The brain believes it's searching for answers. But often, it's searching for acceptance. Acceptance that the story ended differently than expected. Acceptance that some questions may never be answered. Acceptance that understanding something doesn't automatically remove emotional significance. Sometimes the facts arrive, but the feelings remain. And that's because emotional memory follows different rules. Not every person stays in your mind. Most people come and go. You meet thousands of people throughout life. Most disappear without leaving much of a trace, yet certain people become unforgettable. Why? Emotion. Psychologists have long known that emotional experiences are remembered more strongly than neutral ones. Emotion acts like a highlighter. It tells the brain, this matters. Pay attention. Store this carefully. The stronger the emotional intensity, the stronger the memory often becomes. But something even more powerful happens when emotions become mixed. Hope and disappointment. Love and uncertainty, excitement and fear, connection and loss. Mixed emotions create some of the most durable memories humans experience. Because the brain struggles to categorize them, they don't fit neatly into a single emotional box. And what the brain cannot easily organize, it often revisits, again and again. But here's where things become even more interesting. The brain doesn't actually track people, it tracks meaning. Think about someone you've spent years thinking about. Now ask yourself a difficult question. What did that person represent? Maybe they represented love. Maybe they represented validation. Maybe they represented acceptance. Maybe they represented possibility. Maybe they represented a future you once imagined. The person became attached to something larger than themselves. And that's often why they're so difficult to forget. You aren't simply remembering a human being. You're remembering what that human being meant. Sometimes you're remembering how they made you feel. Seen, chosen, important, understood, safe. And when those feelings become attached to a specific person, the brain can confuse the two. It begins treating the person and the feeling as the same thing. But they aren't. And recognizing that difference can be incredibly liberating. Because sometimes what you're actually missing isn't the person. It's the emotional experience associated with them. There's another reason certain people remain stuck in our minds. Rejection. Humans are deeply social creatures. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a group. Being accepted increased safety. Being excluded increased danger. As a result, the brain evolved to treat social rejection seriously. Modern neuroscience has revealed something fascinating. The experience of social rejection activates some of the same neural systems involved in physical pain. The brain doesn't experience rejection as a simple idea. It experiences it as a threat. This helps explain why people can remember rejection for years, sometimes decades. 100 compliments disappear. One rejection remains. One unanswered message. One person who left. One relationship that never happened. The memory persists because the brain keeps asking, what went wrong? What could I have done differently? How can I prevent this from happening again? The intention is protection, but the result is rumination. And rumination can become a trap, because thinking about something repeatedly feels productive. It feels like progress. It feels like processing. But psychologists distinguish between reflection and rumination. Reflection moves forward. Rumination moves in circles, the same questions, the same memories, the same conversations, repeated endlessly. The mind mistakes repetition for resolution, yet no new answers appear. Another uncomfortable truth is that the person you're thinking about may not actually exist anymore, at least not in the way you remember them. Memory is not a recording device. The brain doesn't store people exactly as they were. It reconstructs them. Every time you remember someone, the brain rebuilds the memory. And every reconstruction introduces small changes. Over time, people can become simplified, idealized, edited. The rough edges disappear. The flaws become smaller. The positive moments become brighter. Sometimes we stop thinking about the actual person and start thinking about a version created by memory, a version that becomes more emotionally powerful than reality itself. This becomes especially important when we consider one of the strongest psychological forces of all, possibility. Sometimes the hardest people to forget aren't the people we had. They're the people we almost had, the relationship that never happened, the conversation that never occurred, the future that never became real. Psychologists call this counterfactual thinking. The brain creates alternate realities. What if? What could have happened? What might have been? And because those futures never became reality, they remain impossible to disprove. Reality has limits. Imagination doesn't. A real relationship eventually reveals imperfections. An imagined relationship can remain perfect forever. And that's why possibility can sometimes feel more powerful than reality. Then social media enters the picture. For most of human history, people disappeared. When a relationship ended, people vanished. Today, they don't. They remain visible. Photos, stories, updates, mutual friends, recommendations, digital traces everywhere. The brain wasn't designed for this. Psychologically, the person becomes both absent and present simultaneously. Gone, but not gone. Unavailable, but still visible. The result is confusion. Every reminder reactivates emotional networks. Every update feels like reopening a story that never fully closed. But perhaps the deepest reason we keep thinking about certain people has nothing to do with them. It has to do with us. Sometimes we aren't remembering the person. We're remembering who we were when they existed in our lives. The confident version of ourselves. The younger version. The hopeful version. The version that believed different things about the future. The person becomes a doorway into a previous identity. And what we miss isn't always them. Sometimes we miss ourselves, the life stage, the dreams, the possibilities, the world that existed before certain losses occurred. That's why memories can feel so powerful. They're not just about people, they're about identity. And identity is one of the most emotionally significant things the brain can experience. So what actually helps? First, recognize that thinking about someone doesn't mean you belong with them. Thoughts are not instructions. Memories are not commands. Second, ask yourself a different question. Not, why can't I stop thinking about them? But, what does this person represent? The answer often reveals something deeper than the person themselves. Third, pay attention to the life you're creating now, because attention works like a spotlight. Every moment spent exclusively feeding old stories is a moment not invested in new ones. And finally, accept something difficult. Some stories never receive perfect endings. Some people leave without explanation. Some questions remain unanswered. Some chapters end abruptly. And that's part of being human. One day, something unexpected happens. The person who once occupied your thoughts every day becomes a memory. Not because you forced yourself to forget. Not because you found the perfect answer. Not because closure finally arrived. But because your life became larger than the story. New experiences appeared. New relationships formed. New goals emerged. And slowly, the mind stopped searching. Because it no longer needed to. The lesson remained. The growth remained. The wisdom remained. But the attachment faded. And that's the real goal. Not forgetting. Not erasing. Not pretending the person never mattered. The goal is carrying the lesson without carrying the burden. Keeping the meaning without carrying the weight. Because the people who stay in your thoughts often teach you something important. About love. About hope. About disappointment. About yourself. But lessons and attachments are not the same thing. You can keep the lesson. You can keep the growth. You can even keep the memory without carrying the person forever.